Okay, hello everybody. Once again, this is our second to last episode of Colorado History with Duane Vandenbusche. My name is Ashley. If you're new here, I'm the curator at the Crested Butte Museum. And I would like to start tonight off with land acknowledgement. Also a reminder, it is Native American Heritage Month. And so last week I did post some information, so hopefully you guys got to check that out. If you want to learn anything else, you can email me at curator@crestedbuttemuseum.com. The museum recognizes that we are guests here on this land, historically Ute and Tabawash and Uncompahgre Ute that were forcibly removed from this area due to the Brno Treaty. We hope that you will take time to visit our neighbor, the Ute Museum in Montrose, Colorado, with exhibits developed in partnership with History Colorado and the Colorado Historical Society. While we could never do this history justice, we do include information about the Paleo Indians of the Gunnison Valley, the Ute people, the Brno Treaty, and the Los Pinos Indian Agency in our exhibits. Other ways to support Indigenous peoples of today and the past is to go beyond land acknowledgements. Please consider taking steps towards allyship and reconciliation by conducting your own research of Indigenous groups that were forcibly removed from your own communities. We hope also that you'll become members of our museum by either making a donation, which will support this program, and then future programs that we're going to be doing here at the museum with Duane as well. You can do this by visiting our website, crestedbuttemuseum.com, or calling us here at the museum at 970-349-1880. The museum right now is actually closed Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays until about mid-December, and we are opening right now from Fridays to Mondays, and we're open from 11 to 5, but we are usually here, so you can feel free to give us a call. If you would like to set up a private tour, also give us a call, and Glo can help with that. And then we have a couple things coming up this winter that I just kind of wanted to go over real quick. We have some yurt trips with the Crested Butte Nordic Center, where you will cross-country ski from the Nordic Center out to the yurt over near Peanut Lake. And those will be January 30th from 11 to 2 and March 17th from 11 to 2. Once we have information, that will all be on our website. We're also doing a historic cross-country ski with the Crested Butte Land Trust, and that will be February 9th. That will probably be about 2 hours long. And then Duane is going to have another round of Crested Butte History Series. That is going to start January 20th. So it will continue to be on a Thursday. There will be one day that we won't be doing it, which will be February 17th, because we are going to have a roast for Duane. More information to come. You can check out our website for that. Just a little honor to Duane for all that he does for us and everyone here in Colorado. Also, this program is going to be recorded per usual. And will be available on our YouTube page and crestedbuttemuseum.com. If you have any questions about our programming, please visit the website. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or you can sign up for our newsletter. And we always list our events in the newspaper. Thank you to our lead sponsors, Western Colorado University Foundation, Bill Petras and Bud Bush from Bluebird Realty. Without these sponsors, this program could not happen. And we'll have time for questions at the end after trivia. Okay, Duane.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley, and thanks for everybody for being on board again. We've got over 300 people that are on board and are registered. So let me go through a few preliminaries before we get started. This is our 10th podcast out of 11. So next week will be the last podcast on Colorado history. And the topic next week is going to be an interesting one, and that is, it's going to be Colorado in the 20th century and today, which is going to be, I think, a real interesting one for everybody. As Ashley mentioned, on January the 20th, starting next year, on January the 20th, I'll be doing a new podcast on Crested Butte and the surrounding area, 7 o'clock every Thursday night, 12 sessions. I want to remind everybody that on December the 28th, we're going to have a Christmas polka starring Pete Dunda and his band at the Crested Butte Museum from 4 to 6. And that ought to be a gala affair, and come one, come all, and bring your dancing shoes along. Anybody who wants to donate to the scholarship at Western, westernup.org, has asked me where to go to, and just go to the Vandenbusche Scholarship. If you want to donate to the museum, it's crestedbuttemuseum.com. We'll have questions and comments at the end. As Ashley mentioned, I'm going to get roasted on February the 17th, and people be lining up to give everybody roasting me information, I think. The photographs tonight, I just told Ashley that every couple of minutes she's going to flash a photograph on Western Colorado on the board. Trivia question will come at the end. And I want to say that today is November the 11th. It's Veterans Day. When I grew up, it was Armistice Day, celebrating the end of World War I. But I want to give a hearty welcome and thanks to all the great veterans on a day memorializing them. Yesterday was the Marines' birthday, and today it is Veterans Day, so congratulations to all who served. Today, what I want to do is run through a thumbnail sketch of Western Colorado, and then I'm going to go into the 10 major keys to understanding this area west of the divide. Western Colorado is the western 1/3 of the state. 10% of the population of the state of Colorado, 33% of the land area, and 80% of the water. And it follows the Continental Divide. So any river heading off the Continental Divide and going west, that's Western Slope. Anything going the opposite way is Eastern Slope. David Lavender referred to the Continental Divide as an abused crankshaft. The western slope of Colorado is divided up into 5 areas: the San Juan, the Uncompahgre country, northwestern Colorado, Gunnison Country, and what I call the river country, highlighted by the Colorado River. So let's take a brief look at each one. First of all, northwestern Colorado. Utah, the western border, Wyoming in the north, Colorado River in the south, and the Continental Divide in the east. In 1874, a man named James Crawford was following the Yampa River, and he's looking for good farm or ranch land, and he heard a chugging sound around a bend. And when he came around that bend, James Crawford saw that the chugging sound was made by hot water being forced out of the ground. And it reminded him of steamboats he had been on the Missouri River. And he named the area Steamboat Springs, where 152 hot springs bubbled out of the ground. Also in northwestern Colorado, there was Dinosaur National Monument. That's right where the Green and Yampa rivers come together. Browns Park, which is part of the Outlaw Trail. Also in the northwest, we have the Rangeley oil fields, one of the great oil fields in Colorado history. We also have the #1 oil shale area in Colorado, located on the western slope below Meeker, right around a town called Rio Blanco. And then, of course, around Craig and Axial, we have one of the great coal mining areas in Colorado, and it has all open pit coal mining, and they got a 5-story high drag line or shovel, which lifts out the coal, called Effie. And in the early days of the 1870s, the White River Ute Indian Agency was located right where Meeker is today. And that where the Ute Indians were eventually moved out. The second country is the Uncompahgre country. The word Uncompahgre means red hot stinking water. Red for the sandstone cliffs around Ouray, hot for the hot springs around Ouray, and stinking because of the sulfur smell. Ridgeway to Grand Junction, with the Uncompahgre Plateau, the largest in Colorado, to the west as you're driving there from Montrose to Grand Junction. Outside of Grand Junction, we got Grand Mesa. We also got the Colorado National Monument near Grand Junction. And then there's the town of Grand Junction and the surrounding area of about 100,000 people. Palisade, Clifton, Fruita, Grand Junction. Named Grand Junction because it literally is the Grand Junction of the Gunnison and Colorado rivers. And it's the county seat of Mesa County because there's a whole bunch of mesas nearby. Grand Junction became the #1 populated town of Western Colorado because of the railroad entry. Plenty of water, rich soil, mild climate, which allowed for fruit raising, and of course the cattle industry. Delta was created 39 miles to the south. And that one, not quite so fast on the photos, Ashley, there you go. Delta grew up, Uncompahgre original name, and then Delta because it was the delta of the Gunnison River and the North Fork. And that's where Antoine Robideau had a fur trading post. Montrose, a little bit to the south of Delta by 21 miles, was originally named Pomona, which is the Roman goddess of fruit. Later on, one of the men who started the area was a big fan of Walter Scott and his great book, The Legend of Montrose, so it was named Montrose. The North Fork area with Cedar Ridge, Hotchkiss, and Paonia was great fruit raising. And Somerset and Bowie, a lot of bituminous coal. Third area in Western Colorado was the San Juan Country. That is the southwestern corner of Colorado with 12 mountains, 14,000 feet or better. Mesa Verde, which you're looking at right now, was located right there between Durango and Cortez. The Spanish went right through this region, trying to go from Santa Fe to California to link up their mission stations. 4 great silver and gold mining towns came: Silverton, Ouray, Telluride, and Lake City. And then the great town of southwestern Colorado was Durango. Today, 17,000 people. The name means watering hole. It's got the desert on one side and the mountains on the other side, and that's one of the terminuses of the Durango and Silverton Railroad. The fourth country in the western slope is the river country. That is dominated by the Colorado River, the Eagle, the Roaring Fork, the Blue, and the Crystal. It includes Middle Park, Grand Lake, and Winter Park. It includes Aspen, the #1 silver camp in the world along the banks of the Roaring Fork River. It includes Breckenridge, one of the great gold mining areas on the western slope and the #1 ski area in Colorado today along the banks of the Blue River. And then there's Vail, which got underway in 1962 in the Gore Valley. Condominiums and no automobile traffic, 2 new things back then. And of course, also in that area is Redstone and then Marble, located on the banks of the Crystal River. The famous Redstone Castle and the great marble deposits, which turned out the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and the Lincoln Memorial. And finally, on the western slope, we got the Gunnison Country. And that area opened up last, primarily because of the isolation. Sylvester Richardson and Alonzo Hartman are the 2 great fathers. Hartman coming in as the head of the cow camp in 1872, and Sylvester Richardson coming in with the Gunnison Colony a year later in 1874. Miners brought 25 to 40,000 people in by the early 1880s. Pitkin, Gothic, Tin Cup, White Pine, all got underway. 2 railroads came in the early 1880s. And when things settled down, the Gunnison Country was dominated by what I call the 3 C's and the Big T: cattle, coal from Crested, Butte, college, as in Western State College, and the Big T was tourism. And today we got some of the great natural wonders with the Black Canyon, the Elk Mountains, and of course, Blue Mesa Reservoir, the biggest body of water in Colorado. That takes us to the 10 keys, which we're going to get into. There's a good shot of the Crystal Mill. Western Colorado was a frontier very early, and the word frontier means many things. It can be a boundary between countries, a line that separates wilderness from settlement, or a new and unexplored field. It can also be a state of mind, and that's what the western slope is. And I want to quote a couple of paragraphs from the great anthropologist Theodora Kreiber, who grew up in the Lone Cone Country in the San Miguel Valley of western Colorado. In the 1950s, she reminisced about growing up in that area, and she said this: "In that thin, dry air, life moved at a pace of almost terrible intensity. There were no neutral moments. The galloping brevity of spring and summer, the long months of winter with the threat of tragedy always hovering near. Colors were high, the reds in the soil, the fall gold of the aspens, the indescribable sky. Riding in summer and tobogganing in winter were fast and dangerous. The heights of the mountains and the depths of the canyons were beyond the human norm. One went about totally sensitized. No wonder recovery for the elders was a trip to the coast, and for a youngster, introversion. Get on your horse and ride until you looked out and down, tremendously out and down. God was a pagan god, in the air, over the mountains, in the waterfalls. But how can I give the feeling tone of my childhood in that high alpine valley, which simply is one of the most beautiful spots in the world?" And Kreiber could have been talking about the East River Valley, the Animas Valley, the Blue River Valley, the Roaring Fork Valley, the White River Valley, all those great valleys of Western Colorado. Arthur Chapman wrote about the Western Slope in 1888, reporter for the Denver Post, when he said this: "Out where the hand clasp is a little stronger, out where the smile dwells a little longer, that's where the West begins. Out where the sun is a little brighter, where the bonds of home are a wee bit tighter, that's where the West begins." Western Colorado was often called the land of the Hardway 8. If you go to Las Vegas, you got to throw 2 4s. That's the Hardway 8, and it pays off 8-1. And those were the odds against you when you came to Western Colorado in the early years. Arthur Chapman also wrote another great verse about Western Colorado called "Men to Match My Mountains." Bring me men to match my mountains, bring me men to entertain, men with empires in their purpose and new eras in their brains. Out in Western Colorado, time is measured for distance. So if anybody says, "How far is it from Gunnison to Denver?" you say 4 hours. And it doesn't make any difference if it's 200 miles. What really is important is how's the weather and how many passes do you have to go over to get there. You're looking at Uray on the picture right now. In 1881, a little girl was leaving her Kansas farm for the Western Slope. And as she left, she looked up, put her hands in the air, and said, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Western Colorado." There's a lot of truth in that. Robert Service, talking about the spell of the Yukon, could have been talking about the Western Slope when he said, "I have clinched and closed with the naked North. I have learned to defy and defend. Shoulder to shoulder, we have fought it out, yet the wild was win in the end." David Wood, the great freighter of Western Colorado, accosted by a 21-year-old lady in the San Juan, said, "Sir, you've been in these parts very long?" David Day eyed her with contemptuous disdain and said, "Madam, I haul these damn mountains in here." And then there was Mark Twain, who said, "A mine is a hole in the ground owned by a liar." The Western Slope frontier began to open as early as 12,000 years ago, when prehistoric Native Americans came to the Western Slope. And in the Gunnison Country, there are artifacts that have been picked up on top of Signal Peak and on top of W Mountain. And then in a litany came the Indians of Mesa Verde and Spain, mountain men, explorers, surveyors, placer miners, lode miners, ranchers, farmers, coal miners, skiers, and tourists. Looking backward, the Western Slope has experienced many changes and has gone through many eras of transition. But today, because of problems in the cities, increased state population, now over 5 million, great beauty of the region, people having more money, and people being able to work out of their homes, the Western Slope is facing great challenges, maybe the greatest challenge of all time. and it might change the character and frontier of the Western Slope. Throughout the history of Western Colorado, it has always had 10 keys, which remained rather constant and which has molded the development of that area. And here they are. Number one is geography. The Western Slope, 10% of the population, 33% of the land area, and 80% of the water. Cold, isolation, heavy snow, elevation, aridity, all part of Western Colorado. Arnold Toynbee, one of the great historians of the world, said, geography is the great lever of history. Geography determines history. He believed that if you were over in England, England was an island, didn't have a lot of real estate. They couldn't produce everything they needed, so they had to go out and have colonies and have a great navy to defend them. In Greece, they had 25,000 square miles of one tangled mountain range running into another. And that forced them to develop independent city-states like Athens and Sparta. And in the American West, the frontier, said Frederick Jackson Turner, made what is called an American. And that was the presence of free land in the West. The second key to understanding Western Colorado is water. You're looking at Crested Butte Mountain and the ranchers haying not too long ago in the 1940s or 50s. Water is the lifeblood of the Western Slope. It is the most cussed and discussed topic in the West. Whiskey is for drinking, they say. Water is for fighting. Governor John Love, water runs uphill towards money. There are two great water doctrines in the U.S. One is the one for east of the Mississippi River, and that is the doctrine of the doctrine of riparian rights. And that said that you could take almost any amount of water out of the stream as it went by your property, with two exceptions. Number one, you couldn't take so much out, you stopped steamboats from operating. And number two, you couldn't take so much out that you stopped mill wheels from operating. Well, I submit to you, if you're talking about that much water in the big rivers like the Mississippi and the Tennessee and the Missouri, you're not worried about taking a little water out of the rivers that goes by your property. That water doctrine wouldn't fly in the arid West. And as a result, we developed the doctrine of prior appropriation, which had two major features. One, first in time, first in use. Whoever's got the number one water right is going to go dry last in a dry year. And number two, use it or lose it. You can't hoard water in the arid West. You got to show you can use it, or you give it up to somebody who can use it. Western Colorado produces great amounts of water, and it's salt-free because we are at the headwaters of the Gunnison, the Colorado, the Blue, the Eagle, and a lot of other rivers. And in the future, we're going to have to fight again against water grabs from Denver and the Front Range. Water is Western Colorado's greatest asset and a great long-term investment. And it'll be worth a lot more than anything else today, because more people need more water. It's an ace in the hole for the Western Slope. However, we got to help those who are land rich but money poor. The great fights in the future in the West will be involved with water. Los Angeles, Tucson, Phoenix, Las Vegas, the Front Range, Southern California, all want the water. And there's not enough to go around. And as a result, eventually there's going to be a great eastward movement. In California, in 1999, a court case was called Audubon Society versus Los Angeles. And that basically said that rivers had rights. You got to keep a certain amount of water going down the river. And that's going to clash with the doctrine of prior appropriation. Ultimately, economics will dictate where people live. When water bills go up high enough, people are going to have to move out. The third key to understanding Western Colorado involves the railroads. Without the coming of the railroads, the Western Slope would have remained an isolated wilderness. The coming of the Denver and Rio Grande in 1881, in Gunnison and Durango, the Denver South Park in 1882, the Colorado Midland, 1888, Colorado Springs to Grand Junction, over Hagerman Pass, and then the Moffett Line going from Denver to Craig, gave ranchers, farmers, and miners an outlet. It brought in supplies and was able to get their ore and cattle and farm produce out. The railroads were little engines run by big men, and it pioneered in railroad science. Narrow gauges, flangers which scraped the track clean of snow and ice, snow sheds on top of passes, helper engines to go up the passes, 30-pound rails, Westinghouse air brakes, and automatic couplers. A lot of expressions with regard to the railroads. On time, anytime. You didn't want the railroad to run over you because it was on you for so long. Famous story of a hobo being kicked off the railroad. 25 miles later, the hobo was back on the railroad and the conductor said, "How the hell did you get here so fast?" And the hobo said, "I walked." Another famous expression about railroads. It doubles in, it doubles out, leaving the traveler still in doubt whether the engine on the track is going on or coming back. When railroads stopped running after World War II, the Western Slope suffered economically and psychologically. The fourth major key to the understanding of Western Colorado, the federal government, which owns 75% on the western slope of the land and 35% of the land in the state. You're looking at a great shot of Crested Butte on Christmas Eve in 1955. That was shot by Bob Arnold. Some of you folks might remember him. In the past, the federal government has set the price of gold and silver, owned land that the pioneers homesteaded, gave Indian protection, subsidized stage and railroad traffic, and built water projects. In the old days, the government was looked upon as a friend on the western slope. Now it's looked on as an enemy. Then there was a lot of land and very few people. Today, there's the same amount of land and a hell of a lot more people. And it's hard to satisfy everybody. Mountain bikers, skiers, people who graze cattle, rafting, fishing, hunting, dirt bikes, hikers, and mining companies all want to use the land. And the federal government's trying to be all things to all people. It is very important today in Western Colorado with the BLM, the Forest Service, the Soil Conservation Service, the Park Service, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bureau of Mines all involved. Number 5, key to understanding Western Colorado is mining. The Western Slope has always been a great mining area and still is today. And there's a great shot of Elk Avenue, downtown Crested Butte in 1882. One of the great stories about the optimism of the miner was told in the mining camps very early. A miner, they said, died and went to heaven, and everybody snickered. Nobody ever understood that a miner went to heaven. But this guy had been good, and he presented his pass to St. Peter at the Golden Gates, and St. Peter said, "Can't take you, we're booked." And the miner said, "What the hell do you mean we're booked?" And St. Peter said, "Had a lot of people die in the Middle East." And he said, I'm sorry, first time it's ever happened, but we are booked. Miner said, "I want a temporary pass, and if I can go in and convince one person to come out, I'm in." St. Peter said, "Hasn't happened ever." Miner said, "Shut up and give me the pass." St. Peter thought, well, I feel bad about things. Nobody's going to come out anyway. I'll give him the pass. Miner went in. 8 minutes later, 5,000 people streamed out of heaven. They appeared to be in a fast hurry to leave. St. Peter grabbed the miner and said, "What in the hell did you tell those people?" And the miner said, "What do you mean, what did I tell them? I just told them there's a big gold strike down in hell." And then the miner grabbed his knapsack and headed away from heaven. St. Peter now was hot, grabbed the miner and said, "Where do you think you're going?" And the miner said, what do you think? Where do you think I'm going? He said, haven't you heard? There's a big gold strike down in hell. The miner believed his own publicity. He didn't have any assuredness of gold or silver. There just had to be a rumor. The initial miners in Western Colorado were the placer miners. These are the guys who pan gold out of the streams. The day of the individual miner with a gold pan, who scooped debris out of the stream bed, gently rotated it downhill with a little water in the pan. All of the light dirt floated off. What was left in the bottom of the pan, if you're lucky, was black sand or gold, which was heavy and didn't go out, and pebbles. You took forceps, took the pebbles out, put a little mercury in the bottom of the pan, which amalgamated with gold, then burned the mercury off, and what was left in the bottom of the pan was gold, or they called it pay dirt, the dirt that paid. Shot, wire, grain, flour, dust, and nugget. Free gold. Put in your saddlebags and ride away. Didn't need any smelting. That era ended in Western Colorado about 1870. And then following the placer miners came the lode miners, L-O-D-E, sometimes called hard rock, sometimes called the quartz miners. And they went deep into the bowels of the earth to get the ore out. And now the day of the individual miner was over, because this took a lot of money and a lot of men and a lot of technology whenever you go 300 or 400 feet below the ground. And then you brought up the ore to the top of the ground. And it was very complex. A metallurgist report of 1863 described the following, quote, Colorado's gold ore can only be reduced by a long and complicated and expensive process. And in many ways, it couldn't be reduced until Nathan Hill, a trained metallurgist from Brown University, took samples to Wales in the British Isles. And these great miners were able to reduce the Colorado gold onto a copper matte or base. 6 years later, Nathan Hill figured a way to get it off the base and get the pure gold, saving Colorado's gold industry. The great areas in Western Colorado for lode mining, the San Juan, Breckenridge, Aspen, the #1 silver town in the world, and the Gunnison Country. The boom ended in 1893. Silver boom was over, but mining went on with gold. In Telluride, Silverton, Breckenridge, they all had gold to fall back upon. And then beginning in the 1880s came coal mining. And that became very important in Western Colorado, with Crested, Butte and the big mine and 8 other mines in and around the area. In the North Fork with Somerset and Bowie. In northwestern Colorado with open pit mining. And of course, the great open pit coal mines had that 5-story drag line called Effie. Molybdenum was another area of mining. That one involved Henderson, the great Henderson mine off Berthoud Pass, which opened up in 1976. And in Crested Butte on top of Mount Emmons, the 4th largest molybdenum deposit and the richest in the world is waiting there to be mined. And Crested Butte has waged, I think, a successful fight to prevent mining in a tourist town. Colorado had a lot of other things they could mine and did. Marble and granite, uranium, big boom from 1948 to 68, with Grand Junction, the head of the Atomic Energy Commission center, with 100 companies there. All kinds of mineral and mineral wealth exist in Western Colorado. When the need comes, it might be mined. The 6th major key to understanding Western Colorado is the cattle industry. And that dates back to the 1870s with Alonzo Hartman and Sylvester Richardson in the Gunnison Country. Cattle also came in very early in other areas to provide beef for the mining camps. And that's how the cattlemen got started in Western Colorado. Big demand for the thousands of miners who wanted beef in the mining camps. The cattlemen cleared sage and willows and dug irrigation ditches which led to the hayfields of today. And then the Ute Indians are moved out. The railroad arrived and the mining camps got started. The Gunnison Country became famous for some of the highest quality cattle and best bred cattle in the world. Dan Thornton, who had his ranch at North Elk Meadows and Castle Mountain, sold 2 bulls at his dispersal sale in 1949 for $50,000 each. He became Colorado governor for 2 terms, 1950 to 54. In 1950, the Ford Motor Company made a great movie called The American Cowboy on Gus Roberson's ranch up Ohio Creek. Cattle-sheep war existed in Western Colorado, with both cattlemen and sheepmen wanting grazing permits. And the cattlemen said that their cows wouldn't graze over land the sheep had been on because the sheep emitted a foul odor from the middle of their hooves over which cattle wouldn't graze. They also said that sheep cropped the grass so close to the ground it started erosion. The real reason for the separation of cattle and sheep was economic. Both sides wanted the land, and racial. Cattlemen primarily were Anglo, the sheepmen were primarily Hispanic. In the Gunnison Country, 2 men were expelled from the Gunnison Stock Growers Association because they owned 4 domestic sheep. An angry debate came, with Alonzo Hartman saying, 4 sheep can grow to 400. And when he was asked, have you ever eaten mutton? Hartman replied, yes, but I'm damned ashamed of it. In northwestern Colorado, a great writer named John Rolfe Burroughs wrote of the trouble in a great book called Where the Old West Stayed Young. Killings came at Iola, Taylor Park, Obie Joyful, and in northwestern Colorado. And Len Shoemaker, a forest ranger, wrote of another forest ranger named William Kreitzer, who was the first one in Colorado. And he was in the Gunnison National Forest in a great book called Saga of a Forest Ranger. In the year 1900, because of the collapse of the cattle industry on the plains by 1888, Steamboat Springs was the #1 cattle shipping point in the nation. The cattle industry is the oldest continuous industry in Western Colorado, and ranching is absolutely vital to its future because of the land the ranchers control. They are absolutely essential in controlling development. The 7th key to understanding the Western Slope is tourism. Tourism is the 2nd largest industry in the state and one of the major economies in Western Colorado. Grand Lake, Rocky Mountain National Park, Blue Mesa Reservoir, many ski areas, hunting, fishing, rafting on the Colorado, Gunnison and other Western Slope rivers, hot springs, trains, mountain biking, festivals involving flowers and music bring in millions of dollars every year. Tourism in Western Colorado is worth more than $5 billion a year. Black Canyon's another area. And I already mentioned Grand Lake, the western side of Rocky Mountain National Park, and Grand Lake, the #1 area, the #1 water area, natural body of water area in Colorado. Tourism has always been important. The Rio Grande had Scenic Line of the West on its engines. The Black Canyon was always important. And when Palmer Hoyt, the editor and owner of the Denver Post, had a standing order, when the willow flies came out on the Gunnison River, the telegrapher was immediately told to fire off a telegraph to Hoyt, and he was on the next train over. One of the important factors with regard to tourism is the environment. If we're going to be a great tourist area, we got to maintain the air and the water quality and contain growth. Number 8, key to understanding Western Colorado is electricity. New thing prior to 1900. Thomas Edison came up with direct current for cities and subways, but it couldn't run long distances. In 1891, Louis Nunn of Telluride put in the little camp called Ames, about 4 miles outside of Telluride, a water wheel and belted a generator onto it and got cheaper power up to his Gold King mine at 12,500 feet. He used his brother Paul Nunn, an electrical engineer, George Westinghouse, and a man named Nikola Tesla, one of the great electrical minds ever. And this was, in 1891, the first use of alternating current electricity in history. Much of Western Colorado didn't get electricity until 1935, until Franklin Roosevelt's Rural Electric Association provided money to bring lines to rural people that didn't have it before. Some of the early towns had it because of mining and the domestic need, but the rural people didn't. Today, there is a great movie that just came out about a year ago. It's called The Current War, Edison and DC current against Tesla and alternating current. Number 9, key to understanding Western Colorado natural resources. Western Colorado has enormous amounts of coal, oil shale, uranium, vanadium, molybdenum, gold, silver, copper, lead, zinc, marble, granite, and natural gas. A lot of that has been used for the benefit of the state in the past. It's still waiting there in the future. There is the west portal opening of the Moffett Tunnel coming out near Winter Park. And 10 and last is skiing. This has become a multi-billion-dollar a year industry and goes way back in history to the 1880s and even the 1860s, when missionaries like John F. Dyer and J.J. Gibbon of Telluride and George Darley of Lake City brought the Bible into mining camps. Skiing was a necessity in the mining camps of the 70s and the 80s. 9 to 14 feet long, leather toe piece that you put your mining boot in, heel block 4 inches high in the back, and then a guide pole about 7 feet long. Tour races existed in the various mining camps. Berthoud Pass got a rope tow, first tow in Colorado, 1936. Aspen had a boat tow, 1938. Pioneer, 3 miles up Cement Creek in the Gunnison Country, first chairlift, 1939 and 40. And Billy Fisk and Ted Ryan built the Bavarian Lodge at Ashcroft up Castle Creek in the 1930s and began to ski in the flank of Mount Hayden. With all of those characteristics and keys to the understanding of Western Colorado, there's one more, and that's called the X factor. There is an oil rig out around Rangeley at the Rangeley oil fields. And this story involves the Muslim civilization about 1,000 years ago, when a man called the master told his servant to go into Baghdad and pick up supplies for the next couple of months or 2 or 3, as he had done many times before. The servant came back early, no supplies. Master said, "How come you're back early? How come no supplies?" The frightened servant said, "I've been accosted by death in the marketplace. I got to get out of here. I'm going to the neighboring town 20 miles away of Samura." Master said, "Well, you go to Samura, but I'm going into Baghdad and find out what's going on." And the master went into Baghdad, ran into death in the marketplace, and said, why did you jostle and threaten my servant in the marketplace?" And Death replied, "I didn't jostle or threaten your servant in the marketplace. I merely expressed great surprise that he would be here in Baghdad when I got appointment with him in Samura tomorrow." That's the X factor. That's the unknown. That is, you go on the internet today, people, and you just put in appointment in Samora, and it'll tell you more about that great tale. There is Effie, that 5-story high drag line around Craig, open pit coal mining even today. And finally, the old values continue to be important in any frontier, and certainly on the Western Slope. We've always had them. Hard work, discipline, delayed gratification, staying power, all of those things never die. And they are essential for any generation at any time in history. In the 1880s, a great writer by the name of Eugene Field wrote about a great mining camp called Gold Hill up above Boulder. And then he went to New York to work on a New York newspaper, and he came back over 20 years later, went back up to Gold Hill, but the boom had busted. And there wasn't anybody left at Gold Hill anymore. Nobody to drink with as he had at the Hotel Wentworth. And Eugene Field lamented in a great poem called Casey's Table D'Ote, which went something like this. Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain, when the skies was fair and blue, when the money flowed like liquor and the folks was brave and true, when the nights was crisp and balmy and the camp was all astir, with the joints all throwed wide open and no sheriff to demur. Oh, them days on Red Hoss Mountain in the Rockies far away. There's no such place nor times like them as I can find today. What? Though the camp is busted, I seem to see it still, a lying like I love it on the big and warty hill. And I feel a sort of yearning and a choking in my throat when I think of Red Hoss Mountain and of Casey's Table D'Ote. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Western Colorado, one of the great areas of them all in any state in the United States, a state with a great past. And that is it. Ashley will now come on board, tell everybody how to answer the trivia question for a book to be spent out, and then we'll take any questions or comments.
So as per usual, if you're used to this, just put your answer in the chat box and I will do my best to see who got it first, because I know everyone's internet is different. So hopefully it works out.
It's
Okay.
a little hard to hear Ashley's mic. It's kind of blurred, so I'll say what you said. I think, Ashley, you said they got to go to the chat box and it's first come, first serve. But say it again.
Can you hear me better now?
A little better.
Okay. Just put your answers in the chat box and I will do my best to see who got it first. So just give me a moment.
Here is the trivia question, first come, first serve. I want to know the largest natural body of water in Colorado, which is on the western slope. Grand Lake. Somebody hit it first.
Yeah, hold on. It was Krista Hildebrand.
What's her last name?
I think it's Hildebrand. It's not letting me see her whole name right now for some reason. Krista Hildebrand, yeah.
Krista Hildebrand. All right, Krista's got it. The natural body of water, some people are saying Blue Mesa, that is a body of water, but it's not natural. Grand Lake is natural. San Cristobal around Lake City, incidentally, is second largest natural body of water in Colorado. That's great. Great answer, everybody. Any questions that anybody has on the western slope? Bill, we can't see what you're asking there. I just see WASN. Want everybody to remember that on December the 28th, Christmas polka party, museum, 4 to 6, Pete Dunda. It'll be a gala time. Yeah, Douglas says tourist giveth and it taketh away. Two views on that, no doubt about it, Doug. Any other questions that anybody has? Yeah, Carol, the attempt to put a dam at Union Park, this was a front range attempt to put a dam at Union Park, and then they were going to pump water up and over the Continental Divide or through the Continental Divide and bring it out to the Arkansas River. And the environmentalists fought this. Bureau of Reclamation, I think, thought that it was too expensive and it didn't fly, thank goodness. This was done in the 80s and the 90s. Ashley, is there no heat on at the museum? You are all bundled up, yes or no?
I do not have the heat on. I'm saving money.
Okay, so it's a little cool at the museum.
Yeah.
All right. Ashley, incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, is a good backcountry skier.
No.
Yeah, she is. Any other questions or comments? Next week, Colorado, 20th and 21st centuries and today, with photos.
And don't forget, everybody, the Duane roast is going to be February 17th. And we'll have more information. It's going to be held at the Crested Butte Center for the Arts. We are going to roast Duane all night long.
And that'll be a fundraiser. And I can't believe it. People all over the United States are already sending in great questions. There's a lot of things to roast about me.
There are, and I think we are really working hard on getting a Zoom set up or some type of thing where people can Zoom in from home if they can't make it to Crested Butte.
That's great. And I want everybody to remember that on January the 20th, we'll be having another podcast with the history of Crested Butte and the surrounding area, primarily for locals, but a lot of people around the nation I know are interested in that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments that anybody has? Feel free to check in. Great to have everybody on board.
And I just want to say
thanks, Krista.
Thank you again to our sponsors. You know, it's without them and help from Duane, I don't really think we could do this series because it does cost money. And so we really appreciate all the donations that have come in over the last couple months and in the past as well. So our hopes here at the museum is to continue our web series, and we're also going to do a history at home series too. That will start at the end of March, and I think that's only going to be about 6 to 8 weeks though, but it'll be different historians around the valley. So
well, we appreciate our sponsors very much, and we certainly appreciate all you people who are donating to the Crested Butte Museum. Some of you, think of becoming members. And then, of course, anybody who wants to donate to westernup.com for a scholarship in my mother and father's name, the Vandenbusche Scholarship. Thank you for doing that.
Duane, there is a question in the chat box that Kay reminded me about. Was there ever a timber industry in Western Colorado?
A timber industry, absolutely. All over Western Colorado. In the 1880s, there were sawmills all over the place, providing lumber for ties on the railroad, providing lumber for coal mines all over the state and other mines all over the state, and of course, lumber for the building of cabins. In the Gunnison Country, they had the Trinchera Lumber Company out of Sargent's, and they operated between Sargent's and Pitkin. But they were all over the state. It was a big industry. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to check in before we get off. Yeah, Judy, thank you for commenting. We appreciate it. Anybody else want to check in? Please do. Appreciate having everybody on board. And we hope to see you next week, which will be the last podcast in this current session.
But you can still watch them on our YouTube page. I just redid it last week, so they're all updated. in order. And then you can also scroll down to see Duane's Crested Butte series prior to last year. So
Now, what we'll do next week is I'll go ahead and we'll go over everything that's been taped. Yep. Thank you very much for the comments, everybody. Any other comments or questions, please bop in. Thank you, Patricia. Appreciate it. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Check in. Yeah, Dominic, thank you very much for checking in. American history student. Appreciate you being on board. Yeah, thank you, Karen. A long time ago, I think, in your class, or my class. Appreciate it. Krista, the ski gear is good. I'm getting a new pair of skis. I got some great powder skis, but a new pair of regular slalom GS skis ready to roll this year. So I'm looking forward to it.
Wait, do you guys want to hear a good story? The first time I ever moved to Crested Butte was to go to school at Western, and it was my first day on the mountain. And I don't know if you remember this, Duane, you might not, I don't know. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. I was on the lift. It was my first like day at CB. And you got on the lift with me. You were in the singles line and you were like, can I sit on this lift with you? And I was like, yeah, sure. And we got on the lift and you asked me who I was. And I told you I was a student at Western. And I don't know if you remember that, but that was a long time ago. It was just a random day, but you were the first person I skied with at Crested Butte. I remember that the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, that was Duane.
I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Krista, I am going to be talking to the Ski Patrol, compliments of Brian Finney at 11 o'clock this coming Tuesday, I think in the ballroom at Elevations. I'm going to give 80 slides on the history of skiing. How will the future need for water affect Colorado? Well, boy, that's to be determined, Western Colorado. You know, we have the water and we are now able to prove that we can use it. So hopefully we're going to be able to keep it. But boy, nobody knows what's going to happen if this drought continues. We'll keep our fingers crossed. All right, folks, that's about it. We appreciate everything. Ashley, thank you very much. And Vandenbusche over and out. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.